Building a building. Deciding to build. The decision to build did not come easy for COS. Most congregations, when they organize, expect to build. Not so for COS. As mentioned earlier, when we began, we declared that we would never own a building. But renting eventually became too onerous for most of us. Idealism gave way to reality. So the decision was made to purchase an existing property and remodel it to suit our purposes. After a year or so of diligent search, the committee formed to find such a property reported to council that nothing suitable had been turned up. Abandoned churches were available, but all of them were either too small or the interior configuration was all wrong for our kind of worship, and they would be expensive to reconfigure. Abandoned warehouses were available, but all of them had been built on the cheap and would be expensive to remodel. So the decision was made to build. It was, of course, controversial. Some argued that we were betraying our founding principles. Others argued that we had to face up to reality. A number of attempts to purchase acreage were frustrated. We found an empty block near the center of the city that was for sale. But when the neighbors learned that we planned to build a church on the property, they induced the seller to decline our offer. Eventually, we purchased a property on a cul-de-sac just southeast of the intersection of Hall and Plymouth. Rather soon after we had purchased the property, the office of the Kent County Drain Commissioner exercised its right of eminent domain and bought the property from us for use in its system of stormwater management. In retrospect, each of these properties would have proved much too small and inaccessible. We were providentially saved from making a serious mistake. So we decided to purchase the property on which our building presently stands, in Kentwood, an adjacent southeast suburb of Grand Rapids. This decision also proved controversial. Not only were we reneging on our original declaration never to own a building, we were now joining the so-called flight from the city to the suburbs. Nobody at the time was aware of the fact that though we were indeed locating in a suburb, across the street was a sizable apartment complex, Camelot Woods Apartments, housing a large number of refugees. Unbeknownst to us, that would prove to be one of our most important outreach opportunities, located just outside our door. A building committee was formed by council. I was one of its members. We spent a couple of months developing an architectural program, including expressive as well as functional considerations. The functional considerations yielded a rough estimate as to the square footage we needed. The budget council gave us was low, absurdly low, as would soon become clear. Two young architects on our committee, Kim DeStater and Jim Vandermolen, had both had the internationally known architect Gunnar Burkerts as one of their professors in the School of Architecture at the University of Michigan. So they asked him whether he was interested. He declined, saying that he could not design what we needed for the amount budgeted. We then interviewed a number of architects based in Grand Rapids. They all said that the budget was indeed low, but yes, it should be possible. So we selected a Grand Rapids architect who had done some fine buildings around the city. He led off the second meeting saying, "We have to talk budget." I knew what was coming. His firm estimated that to build what we needed, the budget would have to be doubled. We left the meeting thoroughly deflated. We reported to council what had happened. After some anguished hand-wringing, council doubled the budget. The congregation had made the decision to build. If it took twice as much as what council had originally allocated, so be it. We would trust that the money would come in. The budget was still tight, however, and it became clear that that had the effect on the architect we have chosen of inhibiting his imagination. The design he produced was conventional, uninspired. We suggested revisions. What he did with the revision was as uninspired as his original design. Finally, we had a really painful parting of the ways. At that point, either Kim de Stichter or Jim Vandermolen got back in touch with Burkharts, told him that we were now wiser about the budget. It had been doubled, and asked whether he was now interested. He said it was. And so it was that we wound up with a world-class architect. He had designed a number of expensive churches over the course of his career. So at one point, I asked him why he had taken on this low-budget project. His answer, because it was a challenge. Whereas the low budget had inhibited the imagination of the Grand Rapids architect, Burkharts took it as a challenge. The architectural program. Let me now describe the architectural program that we had developed and given the Grand Rapids architects and that we now gave to Burkharts. The program included, of course, functional considerations, but I will bypass the functional considerations pertaining to office space, classroom space, storage space, and so forth, and mention just a couple of the functional considerations pertaining to the sanctuary. As I noted above, from the very beginning of COS, we have celebrated the Lord's Supper weekly in the way we do now. At the time of communion, we come forward successively in groups that form a circle in the front of the sanctuary. This practice has the obvious functional implication that the sanctuary has to be designed so that this liturgical practice of going forward in groups, forming circles, and then returning to our seats would not be cumbersome, but would flow naturally. The practice has a less obvious functional implication as well. It seemed to us that if the number of worshipers were larger than roughly 500, communion would take too long. So we instructed the architect to design a sanctuary that would comfortably seat roughly 500 people. We also get out of our seats to bring our gifts forward at the time of the offering. This, too, would have to flow naturally. Now for expressive considerations. The shape of the space within a building, the way light pervades that space, and the form and materials of the envelope containing the space all have expressive qualities. They all say something. We were determined that our building would say what we believed. So let me mention the three major expressive considerations that we laid down in our program. First, as we on the building committee were developing the architectural program for our building, we visited a number of churches in the Grand Rapids area that had been built within the previous 20 years or so. Almost all of them were dark inside. Big, swooping roofs coming down low, sometimes with a light scoop, sending a shaft of light onto the front wall. Probably most people, when they think of church interiors, think of them as dark. But our committee felt intuitively that this was all wrong. In my own case, I had the New Testament writing 1 John 1 ringing in my ear. God is light, and in God there is no darkness at all. If we walk in the light, as God is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. So we stipulated that the building had to be designed so that upon entering it, one have the sense of coming into the light. A few years after the building was completed, a Reformation historian who was a colleague of mine at Yale University, Lee Wandel, told me that John Calvin was of the view that the best symbol or image for God is light. His reason being that light is uncircumscribable. It has no boundaries. She has argued in several papers that the reason the early Calvinist churches were so light inside is that they were putting into practice this view of Calvin. Whereas a person familiar with traditional Catholic churches reads the Calvinist churches as empty of sculpture, empty of images, empty of almost everything, Wandel suggests that they should instead be read as chock full of something else, namely natural light. Secondly, the basic understanding of our assemblies that emerged from our discussions was that we are the family of God, brothers and sisters of Christ, assembled around word and sacrament to worship God, to listen to what God has to say to us, and to celebrate the Lord's Supper as a memorial of Jesus. It is we who enact the liturgy. The preacher and the musicians lead us, but they don't enact the liturgy for us. We have not assembled to witness a performance, but all together to worship, to listen, to celebrate. If this is one's understanding of what takes place in the assembly, it would never occur to one to ask the architect to design a building like the typical longitudinal Protestant church building, let alone a building like the typical megachurch. It's no accident that rather often one hears members of some megachurch refer to their meeting space as the auditorium. And that's what it is, an auditorium. What would one ask for instead? At least three things we decided. First, a distinct kind of seating arrangement. Instead of the people being lined up longitudinally in rows, they should be seated in a semicircle around pulpit and table, with the surrounding architectural envelope shaped accordingly. An obvious question here is, well, why not a circle? Congregations have occasionally built circular buildings with pulpit and table in the middle. Many of the original Huguenot churches in France, now, so far as I know, all of them destroyed, were either circular or octagonal. In my view, there are two considerations against such a configuration. First, it makes preaching extremely difficult. What is the preacher to do? Continually rotate? But I also think that the expressive significance of a circle is not right. It's too strongly suggestive of completeness. Yes, we are the family of God, the company of the redeemed, but we're still on the way, already but not yet. I think a semicircle expresses that idea perfectly. Secondly, to express the idea that we are assembled as a family who together enact the liturgy, the space should have a horizontal quality. But we are not assembled for a family picnic. We are assembled to worship God. So the space should also have a vertical quality. My guess is that most architects would throw up their hands and say, make up your mind, people, horizontal or vertical. I can give you horizontal and I can give you vertical, but I can't give you both. We said, we need both. Third, though we are assembled as the family of God to enact the liturgy together, we do need leaders at various points in the liturgy to lead us in the singing, in the prayers, in the reading of Scripture, in the preaching, and presiding at the Lord's Supper. These leaders have to be somewhat elevated and separated so that the people can see and hear them. But how much should they be elevated and separated? Different liturgical theologies will give different answers to this question. Our own answer was that the separation should be minimal. Being appointed to lead or preside over some liturgical action is a special assignment. It doesn't make one a special human being. The first expressive consideration I mentioned above was that one have the sense upon entering the building of coming into the light. The second expressive consideration was that the architecture be expressive of the idea that we are the family of God, assembled around word and sacrament to worship God. Now for a third expressive consideration. What struck us upon visiting recently constructed churches was that they were all surrounded by a large asphalt parking lot, and that most of them had relatively inconspicuous entrances. We felt that this too was all wrong. Liturgy should not be thought of as a special, separate thing that Christians perform in dark places, but as one pole in the rhythm of assembling and dispersing. The Christian life is like a heartbeat, systolic and diastolic. The architecture should give to the activities of assembling and dispersing what we call the processional quality. We assemble and disperse. Then a week later, we again assemble and disperse. These, plus a few additional considerations, constituted the architectural program that we gave Gunnar Berkers. Functional considerations plus expressive considerations. Now, for our meetings with him and his design. Meeting with the architect. Our building committee met with Berkers in his office in Birmingham, Michigan, on the north edge of Detroit. We rode there together in a van and had great fun on the way, discussing our project. The issue of materials came up in our first or second meeting. There was some talk about the obvious point that since our budget was low, the materials would have to be basic. No marble, no huge laminated wood beams, no big stained glass windows. We would have argued against luxury even if we could have afforded it, but we couldn't.
Hold on just a second. This is happening again. I have to take that out. I just want to. Okay.
I had recently been reading and thinking about the Dutch artists of the Golden Age. They had dignified the ordinary, imparted dignity to humble cottages, to skating scenes, to street scenes, to milkmaids, even to cows. I think it was this that impelled me to say, in the course of a discussion about materials, Mr. Berkers, your challenge is to use ordinary materials in such a way that you dignify the ordinary. You can use exposed steel and exposed concrete, provided you use them in such a way that people say, I had no idea that exposed steel and concrete could be so beautiful. Berkers looked down and said nothing for what seemed to me a very long time. I began to worry. Had I annoyed him in some way? Then he looked up and said, I think I understand. A dumpy woman can wear silk and still look dumpy. An elegant woman can wear burlap and look elegant. What you want, if I understand you, is an elegant burlap church. Is that correct? We burst into laughter. He had caught the idea. Thereafter, whenever the chair of our committee corresponded with him, she stapled a piece of burlap to her letter. And that's what the building is. An elegant burlap building. Exposed steel framing, sealed concrete floor, cement block walls, drywall, and a new translucent building material called CalWall, all employed with great elegance. At a subsequent meeting, Burkitts raised another issue pertaining to materials and budget. Nowadays, he said, we can build long spans with steel, but the longer the span, the more expensive. Will you permit me to use a post to reduce the length of the spans? Someone replied, sure, provided that when people see it, they don't say, too bad he had to put that big post there. In retrospect, I think Burkitts was being coy. There is a post, and it does reduce the length of some spans, but it's so much more than that. The steel post is a tree. Burkitts didn't tell us that he was thinking in terms of a tree, but that's clearly what it is. Trunk, branches off the trunk, branches off the branches, the branches supporting an irregular octagonal translucent peak, the trunk going through the roof to become outside a cross. The symbolism is powerful. The tree of life becomes the cross. The tree is the visual focus of the sanctuary and the center of our liturgical actions. Scripture reading, preaching, and prayers are led by someone standing in front of the tree and under the cross. We celebrate communion by forming successive circles around the tree of life under the cross. Should anyone doubt that Burkitts was thinking of a tree when designing what he called a post, a glance at the door to the meditation chapel just off the sanctuary is sufficient to dispel the doubt. Burkitts told us that he wanted to pay for the door himself. The design on the door is unmistakably a tree. Incidentally, the design of the meditation chapel is the only place in the building where we gave Burkitts an entirely free hand. It's a brilliant example of modern Scandinavian design. Burkitts was born in Latvia. The building. Now for the building itself. To anyone who steps into the building with the architectural program in hand that we gave Gunnar Burkitts, it will be obvious that he succeeded brilliantly in realizing the expressive program we gave him. Upon coming into the building, one has a powerful sense of coming into the light. Here is what Dawn Plesher, a member of the congregation, wrote about her experience of first stepping into the building. I remember walking into the Church of the Servant for the first time and seeing the light streaming down through the translucent ceiling onto the Pentecost banners. I was filled with wonder and delight. End of quote. Exactly. Let me add that in addition to light coming in from the translucent, irregular octagonal peak, light also comes in through the translucent clerestory windows that run around the sanctuary. And as you move from the entrance to the center of the sanctuary, note the following. When you enter, the walls you first pass are a medium gray, then a lighter gray. Then the large wall you see before you at the front of the sanctuary is a slightly off-white, and the tree is a true white. Burkitts also succeeded brilliantly in giving to the sanctuary space both a horizontal and a vertical dimension. The flat ceiling, along with a clerestory window just below the flat ceiling, gives to the space a powerful horizontal dimension. This is the family of God assembled. The tree and the translucent peak that it supports gives to the space a powerful vertical dimension. We are assembled to worship God. And as for the liturgical leaders not being elevated and separated beyond what's necessary, the platform from which the minister preaches, from which scripture is read, and from which the prayers are led, is elevated only about 12 inches above the floor of the sanctuary, enough to see the person who is leading, but no more. And the musicians are in an alcove that is just barely an alcove. And what about the processional quality that we asked for? There are two strong entrance-exit axes, starting from well outside the building on the southeast and the southwest, that converge on the tree of life. From outside, one can see along each of these axes straight ahead through the glass doors to the tree. Reverse, from the tree, we can see along each of them straight to the outside. One is led from outside in and from inside out. And what about dignifying the ordinary? Well, notice the polished cement blocks in the back of the sanctuary, the polished concrete floor, the zigzag wave motion of the steel trusses, the beautiful steel of the tree, the ordinary laminated plywood used for the communion table and the lectern. And notice on the outside, the ordinary grooved sheathing, used in ways that most of us have never seen before. In conclusion, let me mention two features of the building that were not part of our program, but came from Burkhardt himself. At one point in our early discussions, Burkhardt asked whether he could use the image of an Italian piazza in designing the building. We were baffled. An Italian piazza? So he explained. In the center of an old Italian city, one finds a sacred space, a church, then a piazza, and then the shops. What he wanted to do, he said, was design the complex on that model. The sanctuary, church, then a circulation space, piazza, and then meeting rooms, shops. This explains why the lights in the circulation space between the sanctuary and the meeting rooms look like street lamps. And then there was the matter of the exterior. The church is located in a residential area, and Burkhardt didn't want it to stick out like a sore thumb. At some point, he showed us a photograph of a Portuguese village in which the houses were painted in a riot of colors. So how about an exterior reminiscent of that? Fine, we said. Someone observed that we hope to have wildflowers growing in the grassy areas around the building. Eventually, the different colors on the building would echo those. One final observation about the building. In our original program, we specified that everything had to be handicap accessible. This was for us a matter of justice. The new building was dedicated on January 15, 1994. The dedication service included a dedication to worship, a dedication to fellowship, a dedication to education, and a dedication to mission. The dedication to worship and to mission were especially eloquent. So here is the dedication to worship. Leader, for bringing us to worship in the beauty of your holiness. People, we give you thanks, O God. For word and water, bread and wine, agents of your grace, we give you thanks, O God. For hands that weave and mold, eyes that see new colors, ears that hear new harmonies, for shapes and gestures, shades and tones, for stone and wood and steel, tokens of your goodness, we give you thanks, O God. That it may reflect your glory and delight our souls and senses, we dedicate this place to you, O God. That we may be faithful in teaching and fellowship, in the breaking of bread, and in prayer, we dedicate this place to you, O God. That through worship in spirit and in truth, we may become the living temples of your presence. We dedicate this place to you, O God. That was the dedication to worship. And here is the dedication to mission. Leader, for every sign of your shalom in this broken world of ours, we give you thanks, O God. For all who go out from among us to be bearers of your light among the nations, we give you thanks, O God. For every hungry neighbor fed, and every homeless neighbor sheltered, every injured neighbor healed, and every captive neighbor freed, for every burden lifted, and every fear dispelled, we give you thanks, O God. That each of us may find new ways of service, so that the light of your love may shine more brightly on those around us. We dedicate this place to you, O God, that we may weep with those who weep, lift up those who fall, and cry for justice with those who suffer. We dedicate this place to you, O God, that we may be filled with holy impatience for the final dawning of your rule. We dedicate ourselves to you, O God. After a few years of meeting in our new building, we began to feel acutely the need for more space for classes, youth activities, prayer groups, and the like, and more space for fellowship after the worship service. The only space for fellowship in the original church was in the circulation area between the sanctuary and the meeting rooms. So a Grand Rapids architectural firm, of which Jim Vandermolen was a member, was commissioned to design an addition in consultation with Burkhart's. The design was dedicated in April 2006. It's a brilliant design. An architect would no doubt discern that it is an addition, but to most people that thought would never occur to them. The spaces flow seamlessly into each other. The building materials in the addition are the same as those in the original, and the architectural character of the addition strongly echoes that of the original. As one enters the building through an entrance on the northeast, one faces straight ahead to the tree of life. The spaces in the addition are highly flexible. In the space called the artery, we now have a place to display visual art. As with all successful additions to buildings, one wonders how we ever managed without it.